Hi, everyone. It's Janine Koden from Kodennected Limited. I'm a trauma-informed coach and narcissistic abuse specialist. Today, I want to talk about something very simple, she says, childhood trauma and how it begins, but in this really easy to explain way that maybe you haven't thought about before or heard of before. So let's start with something simple, like when you scrape your knee. So when you scrape your knee when you're a child, or you fall and you hurt yourself, normally someone comes running on over and they're like, oh no, you've hurt yourself. And they will soothe and stick a plaster on it and, sort it out. They sort it out. And just like that, your pain's validated, and the story's explained, and the nervous system's like, oh yeah, we had a fall, but we're all right now. Let's all calm down. And the story that you would tell yourself with that is that, yeah, I blame the ground, or I blame my feet, or gravity, and you move on. You don't hold on to that. You don't really still think about that over and over again, like 30 years later. And you don't make it mean anything about your worth. You don't think, ugh, I must be fundamentally flawed, right? So that's one type of pain that's easily resolved. The trauma is resolved and you move on. And so the other type of childhood pain is the one that no one explains. So when you tell your friend you like a boy and 5 minutes later she's kissing him behind the bike sheds, and no one comes over to you and says, wow, that was cruel. That says everything about her, not you. Right? No, you're standing there figuring it out alone. So your brain creates meaning, and it creates the wrong one, because you go, oh, it must be because I'm not pretty enough, or I'm not good enough, I'm not cool enough, I'm not wanted, tugging at your core wound of I'm unlovable, right? And that right there is trauma, right? Not the event that happened. It's that unexplained moment after the event. Yeah. Another good example, take school. Less said about that, the better. You're a child, you breathe slightly wrong. Your teacher, who may or may not, or should not be working with children, snaps at you like, you've personally offended their ancestors. And no one comes to you and says, Janine, sweetheart, that wasn't about you. That teacher was projecting, But your body absorbs the blame. Your nervous system internalizes that shame, and that becomes your script. I saw this play out in my own parenting before I understood trauma and autism, because my daughter was diagnosed at the age of 6 with Asperger's. That's special edition autism. And the school gate conversations were normally like, oh, your daughter was so rude to the dinner lady today, or she kicked off and hid under a table. Right? Back then, me, frozen and overwhelmed, didn't ask the questions I should have asked. Like, what triggered her? Or what happened before? Or what sensory or emotional need wasn't met? Or why did she need to escape? Why? Why? We don't ask that as parents. You sit there and you're like, damn, now I look like a bad parent, which tugs at your core wound of I'm not good enough because you got your own stuff going on. And nobody taught me that behavior is communication. This I learnt when I did my psychology degree and moved on to do many other things. But Nobody taught me that dysregulation is a nervous system trying to cope. Nobody explained autism in the right way. I mean, I learned all about it thereafter. Spent many, many years and many Tony Atwood conferences understanding it. But because no one explained it to me, I couldn't explain it to her. And this is exactly how trauma forms. And a child experiences something painful and nobody helps them make sense of it. And that's it. You know, kids don't get traumatized by pain. They get traumatized by the lack of explanation, by being left alone with the wrong meaning. And those early meanings become your adult life, your relationships, your self-worth, your coping strategies, your entire inner world. But, you know, the great news with that is that you can rewrite the script. You know, it's like when you've got an operating system on your phone that's totally out of date because it's trying to pull from information that is just not valid anymore. So you update it, don't you? I mean, you know, I did it yesterday on my phone, and it's you have to update the information, and you got to do the same thing with like your unconscious mind. Because now you have the right language, now you have the clarity, now you have the safety, and now that you can understand your nervous system wasn't wrong, it was just alone with its own thoughts, which were negative. So the question I want you to sit with is, where in your childhood did something painful happen and nobody said that wasn't about you? Because that is where healing begins. And your story gets rewritten and your body finally exhales. So that is something I want you to think about. But thank you for listening. And hey, let's keep rewriting our scripts about who we are together so that they are valid in the here and now, you know, and feel the safety. You've made it this far. You know, you can think through anything and everything, but unless you listen to what your body is still telling you from old scripts, old operating systems, it's not going to change. You're going to get stuck in the same trauma loops and hang out with the same sort of people that keep you stuck in those trauma loops, and people please, perfectionist, and you know, all the different things. But the next time I want to talk about, you know, how we can start to look at those trauma loops, how we can start to look at those scripts and actually change them. So thank you for listening.